Do you have a whip and you need to learn a whip routine yesterday? Then this video is for you. Now let me slow that routine way down. Cattleman's crack, switch hands behind the back. Cattleman's crack, switch hands again. Then you do cattleman's crack, pivot, cattleman's crack, pivot, cattleman's crack, reverse cattleman's crack, little toss, catch it, overhead crack, change hands behind the back, overhead crack, change hands, little body wrap, extra swing, and overhead crack. Optional deep lunge at the end. First, the whip I'm using for this routine is a 5-foot performance hybrid whip, but it'll work for a lot of different whips, probably stock whips from 4 foot to 6 foot, or bull whips from like 5 foot to 7 foot, somewhere in there. And this routine is essentially made up of 3 cracks that any whip cracker can learn on their first day of whip cracking. Those 3 cracks are the cattleman's crack, where you just swing the whip up and bring it down. It's very vertical. The overhead crack, where you're going to swing the whip around your head and bring your arm back. And then the slow figure 8, where you swing the whip up, it cracks, and then you flow right into the next crack. So the point of this routine is to do something with each one of those cracks to get you into kind of a flowy mode so you can go from one move to the next without stopping. And if you need more instruction on those 3 basic cracks, there's plenty of videos out there on YouTube that can help you out. So now let's break down the cattleman's crack and the 2 things I was doing with that. So the first very simple thing is the hand switch behind the back. Just swing the whip all the way back, switch your hands, and do it left-handed. And the main thing is, with the cattleman's crack, once you do it just in one hand, there's kind of no way to flow right into another crack. So that's the problem that the switching hands solves, is it gets a flow going. So you have the switching hands motion, and then after that, the other move that adds some movement and footwork into the routine, which is a fun dynamic to have, is pivoting. So how that works, I'll just do it real slow, back up a little bit, is you're gonna do a cattleman's crack, and then as you follow through, so I'm turning on the balls of my feet, and I'm gonna step through with my opposite foot, step, lift, and crack. Then I cracked over there, same thing, turn, while I lift, step, crack. And that allows me to get a flow going with the cattleman's crack. So you have the hand switch, and then pivoting. A nice way to move from crack to crack with the cattleman's crack. And moving on in the routine, the next crack we do is the slow figure 8. So the slow figure 8, again, looks like this. And it only happens once in the routine. But the nice thing with the slow figure 8 is that, excuse me, it automatically goes from crack to crack. So you can get a flow going already with just a slow figure 8 without switching hands. And then the dynamic I want to add to the slow figure 8 is a basic toss. So after you do the crack behind, you're just going to release the whip up, let it come around, and catch the handle. So that was kind of a low half toss. If you get more confident with your tosses, you can do a much higher sort of full spin toss. And then catch it and come down. It sort of depends on how confident you are with your tosses and how much height you have if you're performing indoors or not. So that's the slow figure 8. And then we just add a toss. Or drop it. Let me get that. And then lastly in the routine, we see the overhead crack. So the overhead crack kind of comes out of the toss after I catch it, like so. Do the overhead crack, then switch hands. So the overhead crack kind of has the same problem that the Cattleman's crack has when you're trying to put together a flow, is that the crack by itself doesn't automatically move into itself again like the slow figure 8 does. So to get that flow going with your overhead crack, you've got to switch hands behind the back. And try to keep it nice and horizontal. I know a lot of people, when they start learning the Cattleman's crack and then they do the overhead crack, it's very easy to do an overhead and then think, okay, now I'm just going to do my Cattleman's crack again. And then the whip's kind of changing planes pretty fast, so it's easy for the whip to tangle. So you want to make sure your overhead cracks stay nice and horizontal. And then from the overhead crack, we add another extra element that's a lot of fun, which is a body wrap. So after I do the overhead crack here, I switch hands, then the whip is swinging this way, setting me up for an overhead crack, or I can do the body wrap. So all I got to do is bring the whip down, sort of leave my arm out, let the whip wrap around me, and then unwrap it and do an overhead crack. So just like that. And so you can even do that on both sides if you want. Go body wrap, overhead, body wrap. And just keep going back and forth. So there, that's everything in the routine. Here, I'll do the routine quick one more time. Do a Cattleman's crack, switch hands, Cattleman's crack, switch hands, pivot, pivot, then slow figure 8, toss, overhead crack, switch hands, overhead crack, body wrap, and So that's the routine, and I would say don't beat yourself up if you don't get all this in the first day. If you're new to some of these cracks, you're going to want to give yourself some days or weeks of daily practice to get used to them and kind of get your body used to doing those cracks. And then once you're used to them, then you put the routine together. And if it's tough to memorize when you're like out in the park practicing, do what I do when I try to learn a new routine, is just write out everything you're supposed to do just on a sheet of paper, and then just look at your notes as you go. Oh, I do this thing next. And that's the best way to do it. All right, so now I'm gonna give you some extra moves you can do with those basic cracks. All right, so our first bit of extras is just one other thing you can add to the Cattleman's crack. So you noticed I was cracking the whip in my right hand and I was turning to the right. You can also turn to the left. So I'll turn to the right a couple times. And then once, see, I think I kind of got to do like a Cattleman's crack that comes across my body this way. So instead of coming past my hip on the same side as the whip, what I'll do is I'll come to the opposite side of my body, and then I'm going to be stepping with the foot that's on the same side as the whip. So then instead of just spinning one way, you can spin the other way, and that way you won't get so dizzy. Spin to the right, spin to the left. And then moving on now with the overhead crack, give you a few extras with that. Now see, we already talked about the body wraps. One fun extra thing to do with it is a little sort of staff spin move, hand switch in the back. So instead of just switching hands like that, you can add a little bit of extra mojo onto the whip handle. Like so. So I'll turn around so you can see what that looks like. So that's an extra hand switch. And also, if you have a big space and you like a big stage or something, you need to fill up the space. The one nice thing with the overhead crack is that you can do a lot of traveling sort of while you're swinging it overhead, especially if you can change hands. So here I'll be able to sort of travel from left to right and sort of take up some space and fill up the frame. So if I go, let's see, I gotta go on this side, then switch hands, and I can keep spinning around and around and around. Do an overhead crack, I'm ready to go back to the other side, spin around. So as long as you know, like, okay, when you're at the end of your movement, to switch hands. You can always crack the whip and go back the other way. Let's see, did I have an extra for the slow figure 8? Well, I'd say one nice thing with the slow figure 8 is you can just keep doing it over and over again by itself. I guess one thing I always like when I see performers is to see that they're looking where the whip's cracking. It can kind of make it more dynamic and feel like, ooh, he meant to do that because he's looking there. All right, now there are other tosses you can do with a slow figure 8 once you've learned that one. You can toss it under the leg and catch it. Change my grip right there. Or you can do an elbow toss. So, like so. I think there's plenty of videos about the elbow toss. It's basically do a ring grip. The whip comes to your elbow. You let it come up here, release the handle, grab the whip, swing it up, and catch it. Or you do a catch behind the back. Ooh. Some days, this is what I get for not practicing. There. Behind the back. So a bunch of different tosses and catches that you can do out of the slow figure 8. Well, that's my video for people that need to learn a whip routine yesterday. I hope it helps you. A couple notes. Go ahead and learn the exact routine that I put together, but don't feel like you're confined by that. Take all these little bits of pieces, individual moves, and mash them all together and put together your own routine. And expect it's going to take like days or weeks to try to get comfortable putting all those things together. And also I'd like to give a big shout out to Joe Williams. Joe is my latest supporter on Patreon. If you would like to support this channel, you can do it for as little as $1 a month. Also, every one of my patrons gets a 10% discount on any whips they order from me. And or if you don't want to do a monthly donation, if you just wanted like a one-time like tip, hey man, thanks for the video, I'll also put my Venmo information in the description. Well, my name is Adam Winrich. Thanks for watching.